My son's therapy dog was the only thing keeping him alive until a hospital janitor took him for a walk and bragged, "I held him down and poured insecticide in his mouth until his heart stopped." I didn't say a word. That was 9 months ago. This morning, her sister was sitting in her car, crying so hard she couldn't even start the engine. My son Ben was 5 when the doctors declared he had leukemia. He used to be the type to finger paint thank you cards for the garbage collectors every morning. But within a month, he looked like a ghost, wearing his own skin. He stopped talking and spent his days staring at the machines keeping him alive. But everything changed when I got Peanut. Peanut was a service dog who was trained to visit children undergoing chemotherapy in hospital. He had eyes the color of melted chocolate, deep and endlessly comforting, as if he could peer straight into your heart and soothe every ache he found there. It was like he had a PhD in loyalty. The second I'd bring him in from the car, Ben would reach out his arms and Peanut would hop up, maneuvering his way around the monitors, making sure not to touch anything. It was the only time my kid remembered how to smile. But it wasn't just Ben. The whole ward lived for Peanut's visits. Parents scheduled their time to when I'd be there, just to see their kids happy for 60 minutes. Until Margaret, a new janitor that was hired, started to clean the hospital floor at night. She was middle-aged, the type to have a permanent scowl on her face, gray hair pulled so tight it looked painful. Her favorite hobby was complaining about everything, especially Peanut. She started off as a regular Karen, gossiping about his disease risks to anyone who would listen. To avoid any hassle or lawsuits, I made sure to get him checked for fleas twice a week at the vet. But instead of thanking me or even just leaving me alone, she would just sneer and say that vets will say anything for money, that she was deathly allergic, which made me no better than a unaliver. Sigh. Anyway, a week later, Ben had a reaction to his meds and spent the night screaming. It wasn't until Peanut lied on his chest that he finally calmed down, and that's when I saw it. Margaret watching through the window, her face so contorted I could have sworn she was having a heart attack. Fast forward to the next night, when I was sitting on a steel chair in the waiting room. I had to go to the bathroom and asked one of the other moms to mind Peanut. But when I came back, he was gone. Apparently, the janitor asked the mom to take him on a walk. My heart twisted. I found Peanut half an hour later, but he wasn't his joyous self anymore. He was now completely dead, his carcass left to rot in the parking garage. 100 different emotions flooded my brain at once, but only one stayed, and that was rage. Because while I tried to process everything, I could hear Margaret in the distance. She was on a phone call, bragging about how she had held Peanut down and poured insecticide into his mouth and ears until his heart stopped beating. So I did what any emotionally stable, loving father would do. I drew up a revenge plan, not involving the police or court system. That was too nice. I wanted her to feel what Peanut felt, so I started paying attention to her routines. She parked her car in the same spot every night and always left it unlocked. Her pathetic self lived alone in a ground-floor apartment, and after a week, I struck gold. I found this condemned house on the south side absolutely crawling with fleas. I collected samples wearing protective gear and sealed everything in airtight containers. But it all started with some harmless gossip. I mentioned to day staff that I'd seen stray cats in the parking garage, made sure the rumors reached the night shift, left a note on Margaret's windshield about rats near her car. She started checking under her vehicle every night with a flashlight. During one of Ben's overnight procedures, I had 6 hours of solid alibi. That's when I striked. I carefully placed flea-infested fabric deep inside her car's ventilation system, where she'd never think to check. I put eggs under the floor mats and in every crevice of her seats. And for good measure, I soaked everything with synthetic flea pheromones to accelerate breeding. Margaret came to work the next week, scratching her arms. By day 2, she had visible welts she tried to hide with long sleeves. And on day 4, the fleas were jumping visibly in her car, and she was practically clawing her skin off. She started wearing gloves all the time and sprayed herself with pesticide between rooms. Then one night, it finally happened. She collapsed right outside the pediatric ward, full anaphylactic shock. Her throat closed while she clawed at her neck. They rushed her to the ER, but it was too late. Her throat had closed completely, and she'd gone too long without oxygen. Lol. The doctors tried everything, but Margaret died right there in the same hospital where she'd killed Peanut. The official cause of death was anaphylactic shock from flea bites. That final night, the reaction was instant and fatal. Oops. And thanks to my little rumors, no one suspected a thing. On my way out, I passed the morgue and watched her roll out on a white stretcher. It was the first time I had smiled since Peanut died, but the next morning changed everything. Woke up to knocking at my door, sharp and insistent. Opened it to find a social worker and a police officer standing there. The social worker was young, couldn't have been more than 25, with worried eyes. The cop was older, had that seen-it-all expression. They said my actions had been recorded recorded on security cameras. My blood went cold. The social worker explained that Margaret had installed hidden cameras all over the hospital months ago. Said she suspected people were stealing supplies, particularly from the pharmacy. The footage showed me entering the parking garage the night Peanut died. Didn't show what actually happened to him, but it showed me there when I'd told the officers taking my statement that I was in Ben's room the entire time. Turns out Margaret had a sister named Eleanor who also worked at the hospital. She was in administration, had access to everything including security systems and personnel files. While going through Margaret's things, she found the camera recordings on a hidden hard drive and turned them over to the police. Said she knew something wasn't right about her sister's death, that Margaret had mentioned someone was out to get her. I hired a lawyer right away. Lawrence said the footage didn't prove anything except I was in a public area. Lots of people used that garage, especially at night when the main lot was full. But Eleanor wasn't giving up. She started filing complaints about my visits with Ben, said I was disruptive and bringing contamination risks into the ward, used every bit of her administrative power to make our lives hell. She used her position to change hospital policies overnight, new rules about service animals that made it almost impossible to bring them in. Had to fill out 20 pages of forms for each visit, get them notarized, get special insurance that cost hundreds of dollars, have the animal examined by their approved vets only, who charged triple the normal rate. All while Ben was getting worse without his therapy visits. He'd stopped eating again, just stared at the ceiling all day. Other kids on the ward were suffering too. One little girl named Isabella used to light up when Peanut visited. She'd practice walking just so she could take him around the ward. Now she just stared at the wall, refusing her physical therapy. Her mom begged me to find a way around the new rules, but I was stuck in red tape. Every form I filled out got rejected for some tiny error. Every appeal got denied. Eleanor had built a wall of bureaucracy that was unaliving these kids' spirits as surely as the cancer was unaliving their bodies. I started digging into Eleanor's background, found out she'd been at the hospital for 15 years, worked her way up from filing clerk to senior administrator, had a reputation for being a stickler for rules, but nobody really liked her. The nurses avoided her in the hallways, ducking into patient rooms when they saw her coming. Even other admin staff kept their distance, eating lunch at their desks rather than risk encountering her in the break room. Then I discovered something interesting. Eleanor had been doctoring Margaret's medical records, adding notes about mysterious rashes that started weeks before the flea incident, trying to make it look like Margaret had been suffering from some unknown condition. I found this out from a nurse named Frances, who worked in records. She showed me the original files versus the edited ones during her night shift, whispering as we huddled over the documents. The handwriting was different. The dates didn't match up with shift schedules. Frances's hands shook as she pointed out the discrepancies, clearly terrified of getting caught helping me. Eleanor started befriending other parents in the ward. She'd show up during visiting hours with coffee and donuts, acting all sympathetic. Her voice would drop to this concerned whisper as she'd casually mention how I seemed unstable since Peanut died, how I'd been acting strange, muttering to myself in the hallways, staring at other therapy animals with this disturbing intensity. Complete lies, but some parents bought it, started requesting room changes to get their kids away from Ben, like my grief was contagious or something. One mom named Ruth actually confronted me about it, said Eleanor told her I'd threatened Margaret before she died, that I'd cornered her in the stairwell and made violent gestures. I explained what really happened with Peanut, but Ruth just looked at me with pity, like I was some crazy person who couldn't accept that my dog had gotten sick. Eleanor had poisoned the well so thoroughly that nobody wanted to hear my side. Ruth actually pulled her daughter away when Ben tried to wave at her through the window. My lawyer Lawrence suggested we look into Margaret's past, maybe find something that would shift the focus away from me. We hired a private investigator, this retired cop named Douglas, who specialized in background checks. What he found made my stomach turn. Margaret had worked at 3 other hospitals over the past decade. At each one, service animals had died under mysterious circumstances. The pattern was so clear, it made me physically sick. At Children's Hospital in Columbus, a therapy rabbit named Coco was found dead in a supply closet. The owner was told it must have eaten something toxic. At St. Mary's in Cleveland, 2 therapy dogs died within a month of each other, both from unknown causes. At Riverside Pediatric Center, a comfort cat named Whiskers had a sudden seizure during a visit. The pattern was clear, but nobody had connected the dots, because Margaret always moved on before suspicions could build, leaving grieving families in her wake. Douglas even found evidence that Margaret kept trophies. When they cleaned out her apartment, there were collars hidden in a shoebox in her closet, each one labeled with a date and location in her neat handwriting, like a serial killer keeping souvenirs. One collar still had fur attached, a few gray hairs from what must have been an older therapy dog. dog. But when Douglas tried to give this evidence to Lawrence at our scheduled meeting, Eleanor intercepted it. She was waiting in the parking lot when Douglas arrived, as if she'd been tipped off, claimed she needed to review any documents related to her sister as next of kin. Douglas, thinking it would help our case to be cooperative and show we had nothing to hide, handed over the copies to Lawrence's office. Eleanor took one look and said they were obviously forgeries, that I was desperately trying to frame her dead sister. She destroyed the documents right there in front of Douglas, tearing them into tiny pieces with this satisfied smirk. Then she filed a restraining order against me, said I was harassing her during her time of grief, that I'd been following her, making threatening phone calls she'd conveniently never recorded. The restraining order meant I couldn't go within 500 feet of her. Problem was, she made sure to be at the hospital during all of Ben's treatment times. I had to wait in the cafeteria while my son went through chemo alone. The nurses would text me updates, but it wasn't the same. Ben kept asking for me, and they had to lie, say I was stuck in traffic or parking the car. I could hear him crying for me sometimes, the sound carrying down the hallway like a knife to my heart. Then came the day of Ben's big surgery. They were removing a mass from his lung, a risky procedure that could go either way. I'd been preparing for weeks, planning to be there when he woke up, had even recorded videos on my phone for the nurses to play if he got scared. But Eleanor used her administrative access to have me banned from the hospital entirely that day. Said there had been security concerns about my behavior. Claimed I'd been seen carrying suspicious packages near the pediatric ward. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 6 hours, watching other parents come and go, living my nightmare. My phone battery died from checking for updates so frantically. The rain started around hour 3, matching my mood perfectly. Finally, a nurse named Ashley snuck out to find me. Ben had made it through but kept crying for me, calling my name even through the anesthesia fog. She was risking her job just telling me this, but she had kids of her own, understood what this was doing to us. She squeezed my hand through the car window before hurrying back inside. Lawrence, my lawyer, discovered something interesting while reviewing hospital finances. Eleanor had been embezzling from the Children's Ward Charity Fund, small amounts over years, but it added up to almost $50,000. She'd been using her position to approve fraudulent invoices, pay fake vendors that led back to her own accounts. Some of that money had gone to pay Margaret's legal fees from previous incidents at other hospitals. There were receipts for lawyers in 3 different states, all specializing in medical malpractice defense. We thought we finally had her, but Eleanor was smart. She'd covered her tracks well, and when internal audit started looking into it, she shifted blame onto a junior accountant named Logan. Poor guy had only been there 6 months, didn't even have access to the systems she'd used, but she fabricated emails, created a trail that led right to him. He got fired while she played the concerned administrator who'd discovered the theft. I saw Logan cleaning out his desk, tears streaming down his face, his whole career destroyed by Eleanor's lies. Eleanor's next move was pure evil. She tried to have Ben transferred to a different hospital 2 hours away, said our local facility couldn't provide adequate care anymore, that Ben needed specialists they didn't have. Complete lies, but she forged my signature on transfer documents, made it look like I'd requested the move. The forgery was good too. She must have practiced copying my handwriting. If it went through, I'd only be able to visit once a week due to the distance and my work schedule. I found out when a social worker showed up to discuss the transfer logistics. She had a whole folder of paperwork, bus schedules for the convenient public transportation to the new hospital. I told her I'd never signed anything, but Eleanor had anticipated this. She'd prepared a whole file documenting my erratic behavior and memory issues, suggested the stress was affecting my mental state. The social worker left looking concerned, said they'd need to evaluate my fitness as a parent. I saw her making notes as she walked away, probably about my agitation and paranoid accusations. That night I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about Ben alone in that hospital bed, probably wondering why I'd abandoned him, about all the other kids who'd lost their therapy animals because of Margaret, about Eleanor getting away with everything while painting me as the villain. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in, so I decided to take a different approach. I started recording everything, every interaction, every conversation. Oregon was a one-party consent state, so it was legal. Bought a small digital recorder and kept it in my pocket at all times. Waited for Eleanor to slip up, to say something that would expose her. Didn't take long. She was arrogant, thought she'd already won. She cornered me in the hospital cafeteria one day. I was eating a stale sandwich, trying to unalive time between Ben's treatments. She sat down across from me with this smug smile, didn't even ask permission, started going on about how she knew what I'd done to Margaret, how the fleas were too convenient, too targeted. But then she said something interesting. Said Margaret had been doing important work, cleaning up the hospital, that some families didn't deserve comfort when they were just prolonging the inevitable. Her exact words were burned into my memory. I kept my face face neutral, but inside I was screaming. She basically admitted she knew Margaret had been unaliving therapy animals, that she supported it, but she was careful with her words, nothing that would hold up in court without context. Still, I had it all on tape. Started building a file of my own, organizing everything chronologically, making backups of the recordings. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A nurse named Salem who worked nights came to me with information. They'd been suspicious of Eleanor's frequent visits to the pediatric ward, especially during off hours. Eleanor had no medical training, no reason to be near the medication rooms, but Salem had seen her there multiple times, always when she thought nobody was watching, always wearing gloves, which was odd for an administrator. Salem had started documenting these visits in their own files, times, dates, what Eleanor was doing. They'd even taken some photos on their phone, blurry but clear enough to show Eleanor handling IV bags, messing with medication schedules. We compared notes and realized Eleanor had been visiting right before several kids had bad reactions to their meds, including Ben's reaction the night I'd brought Peanut to comfort him. The timeline matched perfectly. We took everything to Lawrence, but he said we needed more concrete evidence. Photos of someone in a medication room weren't enough to prove attempted unaliving, so Salem and I came up with a plan. They'd keep watching Eleanor while I worked on getting the security footage from those nights. The hospital was supposed to keep recordings for 90 days, but Eleanor had been mysteriously deleting files. Always small gaps in the footage, just enough to cover her tracks. I reached out to a tech guy named Jose who worked in IT. He owed me a favor from when I'd covered for him during a family emergency. Jose was able to recover some of the deleted footage from backup servers Eleanor didn't know about. What we found made my blood run cold. Clear video of Eleanor switching IV bags, adding something to medications. She'd been slowly poisoning kids to make it look like the therapy animals were spreading diseases. The precision of it, the calculated cruelty, made me physically ill. But before we could take this to the police, Eleanor made her final move. She must have sensed the walls closing in because she got desperate. Decided to go after Ben directly. Not with slow poison this time, but something immediate. Salem caught her injecting something into Ben's IV line during what should have been a routine check. Eleanor had waited until the shift change when she thought no one would notice. Salem told me later they didn't think, just reacted, screamed "stop" at the top of their lungs, and charged into the room. Eleanor spun around, tried to hide the syringe behind her back, but Salem tackled her like a linebacker, sending them both crashing into the monitor stand. The syringe went flying, hit the wall, and exploded its contents everywhere. The noise brought everyone running. 2 security guards, 3 nurses, even a janitor with his mop bucket. They found Eleanor on the floor with Salem sitting on her, still screaming for help. Eleanor kept saying Salem was crazy, that she was just checking on the patients, but the syringe was right there. The evidence splattered on the wall. Security held Eleanor while someone called the police. She switched tactics then, started crying about how I'd threatened her, how this was all a setup, said I must have paid Salem to frame her, but the head nurse had already called the pharmacy to check what was in that syringe. When they said potassium chloride, enough to cause instant cardiac arrest, even the security guards looked sick. The cops showed up fast. 2 uniforms first, then a detective. They bagged the syringe, took samples from the wall, photographed everything. Eleanor demanded a lawyer, wouldn't say another word, but her face when they put the handcuffs on, pure rage mixed with disbelief, like she couldn't understand how her perfect plan had failed. I was in the cafeteria when it happened. Didn't know until a nurse came running to find me. Said there'd been an incident, but Ben was safe. I don't remember running, but suddenly I was in his room, checking him over like maybe I'd find some mark, some sign of how close we'd come. He was confused, kept asking why everyone was upset. I just held him and tried not to cry. The detective interviewed me for 3 hours that night. I gave him everything, the recordings, the recovered footage, all our documentation. He kept shaking his head as he went through it. Said in 20 years he'd never seen anything like this. 2 sisters systematically torturing families with sick kids. He actually had to take a break halfway through, went outside to compose himself. They searched Eleanor's office that night and found more evidence. Hidden USB drives with copies of the blog posts, printed emails between her and Margaret planning their attacks, financial records showing the embezzlement, forged documents for the false transfer orders. She'd been sloppy in her desperation, left a trail a mile wide. They even found a draft email to another hospital warning them about my dangerous behavior, setting up her next move if the unaliving attempt had worked. The investigation expanded fast. FBI got involved because the blog crossed state lines. They found subscribers from all over the country, some who'd tried similar schemes in their own hospitals. It was like Eleanor and Margaret had inspired a whole network of people who got off on making sick families suffer. Made me physically ill reading about it. More families started coming forward. A couple from Detroit whose therapy cat died mysteriously, parents in Phoenix who'd been harassed by administrators after losing their service dog. The FBI said there were at least 12 hospitals involved, dozens of families affected, all because two twisted sisters decided suffering wasn't enough for people with sick kids. Eleanor's lawyer tried to claim mental illness, said she'd been manipulated by Margaret, but the prosecutors had those blog posts going back years, showing Eleanor was the one who started it. She'd recruited Margaret, taught her how to unalive animals without leaving evidence. The emails between them were like something out of a horror movie, discussing techniques and comparing results. During the trial, they brought in family after family to testify, parents sobbing as they described their children's devastation after losing their therapy animals, kids who'd stopped treatment, given up hope. One father from Indianapolis talked about how his daughter tried to hurt herself after her rabbit died, how she blamed herself for not protecting it. The jury was in tears. Eleanor sat through it all with this blank expression, like she was somewhere else entirely, only showed emotion when they played the recordings of her bragging about the scheme. Then she'd lean over to whisper frantically to her lawyer, probably still trying to find a way out, but there was no escape from what she'd done. The prosecutor laid out the whole timeline, showed how Eleanor and Margaret had picked the most vulnerable families, ones already hanging by a thread, how they document the breakdowns, rate them like it was some sick game. The blog posts were the worst part. Detailed descriptions of parents crying, kids refusing treatment, families falling apart, all written with this gleeful tone like they were proud of their work. They brought in experts to testify about the psychological damage, how losing a therapy animal could set back treatment by months, how some kids never recovered that trust. One doctor said it was a form of torture, targeting the only source of comfort these children had. The jury looked ready to convict right then and there. Eleanor's defense was pathetic. Her lawyer tried to argue the evidence had been obtained illegally, that I'd orchestrated everything to cover up Margaret's unaliving. But the security footage was clear, the syringe was real, and dozens of families were telling the same story. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Attempted unaliving, fraud, conspiracy, cyber-stalking, the list went on. The judge gave her the maximum sentence for everything, 15 years just for trying to unalive Ben, plus more time for each additional charge. She'd be in her 70s before she got out, if she lived that long. When they read the verdict, Eleanor finally showed emotion. Not remorse, though, pure fury that she'd been caught. The hospital settled with every affected family without going to trial. They knew they couldn't win, not with all the evidence of negligent oversight. The CEO resigned immediately. Half the board followed. They brought in new leadership, people who actually cared about patient welfare. First thing they did was gut the whole administrative structure, start fresh. The settlement money was substantial, but I didn't want it for myself. Used it to start the Peanut Foundation, named after the dog who'd started it all. We provide free therapy animals to any family that needs one, no questions asked. Cover all the training, insurance, vet bills, everything. No family should have to fight for comfort while their kid is fighting for life. Ben helped design the logo, a golden retriever with angel wings. He insisted Peanut's photo be on every certificate we issue to new therapy animals, so they know they're part of something special, he said. Kid understood legacy better than most adults. He spent hours writing the mission statement, making sure it honored not just Peanut, but all the animals Margaret had unalived. We hired professional trainers who specialized in medical therapy animals, not just basic obedience, but specific skills, how to navigate IV lines, stay calm during seizures, provide deep pressure therapy during panic attacks. Each animal goes through 6 months of training before they're placed. We've got dogs, cats, rabbits, even a few guinea pigs for kids who need something smaller. The foundation grew faster than I expected. Donations poured in from families who'd heard the story, from hospital workers who'd seen the difference therapy animals made. We expanded to 3 states within the first year, set up training centers, hired coordinators to match animals with families, even got some corporate sponsors who covered operational costs, so every donation went directly to the animals. Ben became our unofficial ambassador. He'd visit hospitals with hope, telling kids about Peanut and how love can overcome anything. He had this way of explaining it that made sense to sick kids, how sometimes bad things happen, but we can make good things from them. How Peanut's love was so strong it changed laws and saved other animals. Kids would listen with wide eyes, then hug their own therapy animals a little tighter. Eleanor didn't last long in prison. Word spreads fast about people who hurt kids, even in women's facilities. 3 months in, she was attacked in the shower. Another inmate whose daughter had cancer, who'd heard what Eleanor tried to do. The injuries were severe, traumatic brain injury that left her unable to speak or move. She's still alive, technically, lying in the prison medical ward being fed through through tubes. Sometimes I think about visiting her, seeing if there's any recognition in her eyes, but I never do. She's living the nightmare she tried to create for others, helpless, dependent, forgotten. The other families and I prefer to focus on the positive, on building something good from the ashes. Eleanor is the past. The foundation is the future. We've placed over 100 animals now. Each one represents a child who won't suffer like Ben did, a family that won't face that loss. The training program has become a model for other organizations. Vet schools send students to learn our methods. We've published guidelines that hospitals across the country use to protect therapy animals and the families who depend on them. Ben's 10 now and already planning his future. Wants to be a veterinarian specializing in therapy animals, maybe run the foundation someday. He volunteers at the training center every weekend, working with the new animals. Has a gift for knowing which ones will be good with sick kids. Peanut tells me, he says sometimes, and I don't argue. Maybe he does. The pediatric ward is unrecognizable from those dark days. Therapy animals everywhere, kids laughing, parents smiling. They renamed it the Peanut Healing Center, put up a memorial wall with photos of all the animals Margaret unalived. But it's not sad. Each photo is surrounded by pictures of the kids they helped, the lives they touched. Proof that love leaves a mark that can't be erased. New families get told the story when they arrive. Not to scare them, but to show them they're safe now. That people fought to protect their right to comfort. That the system works now. Sometimes parents seek me out to say thanks, even though their kids never met Peanut. They understand what his sacrifice means, what all our animals' sacrifices mean. Hope is getting older now, but still visits the hospital weekly. She's trained 3 younger dogs who'll take over when she retires. Ben picked them out himself, said they had Peanut's spirit. Watching him work with those dogs, seeing his compassion and determination, I know we've won. Eleanor and Margaret tried to destroy that goodness, but only made it stronger. The foundation will outlive us all. We've set up trusts, established training protocols that will last generations. Somewhere right now, a sick kid is meeting their therapy animal for the first time, feeling that instant connection. Somewhere else, a family is finding hope in the darkest moment. That's Peanut's legacy, not the darkness that took him, but the light that followed. I visit his grave every week, usually with Ben and Hope. We tell him about the new animals, the kids they're helping. Fresh flowers appear regularly from families we've never met. The cemetery installed a bench nearby because so many people come to pay respects. Sometimes we find thank you notes tucked under rocks, messages from kids whose therapy animals gave them strength. Last week, we placed a golden retriever named Sunny with a girl fighting the same cancer Ben had. When I delivered Sunny to the hospital, the girl's mom broke down crying, not from sadness, but relief. She'd been watching her daughter fade away, lose hope. But when Sunny climbed onto that bed and rested his head on her chest, the girl smiled, really smiled. Her mom grabbed my hand and whispered, "Thank you," over and over. That's what this is about. Not revenge or justice or even redemption. It's about making sure no family faces what we faced alone. About turning the worst thing that ever happened to us into something that helps others. Peanut died because 2 twisted people thought suffering wasn't enough for sick families, but his death exposed them, stopped them, and created something beautiful. Ben keeps a journal where he writes to Peanut, tells him about every animal we train, every child we help. He's planning to publish it someday. Wants other kids to know that heroes come in all forms, that sometimes a dog can change the world just by loving someone, that good people will always stand up to evil, no matter the cost. The Peanut Foundation isn't just about therapy animals anymore. It's about hope, about proving that love wins. Every wag, every purr, every gentle nuzzle carries Peanut's message. You're not alone. You're loved. You matter. Eleanor and Margaret thought they could destroy that. They were wrong. Love like that doesn't die. It multiplies, spreads, grows stronger with each life it touches. So that's the story. How one good dog exposed 2 monsters and changed everything. How a father's rage became a force for healing. How a little boy's love for his dog became a movement that helps thousands. It's messy and painful and beautiful all at once. But that's life, right? The worst things and the best things all tangled up together. Ben asked me once if I'd change anything if I could go back. I told him the truth. I'd save Peanut if I could. Stop Margaret before she hurt him. But then all those other animals would have died. All those families would have suffered. Sometimes the greatest good comes from the greatest loss. Peanut didn't die for nothing. He died so others could live, love, and heal. That's his legacy. That's what we built from the ashes. And that's why Eleanor rots in a hospital bed while we thrive. She chose cruelty. We chose love. Love won.